Hollywood has always been a galaxy of stars, a universe of burning brilliant lights that captivate our imaginations and define our eras. We know the constellations, the stars that have burned for decades, their names etched into the firmament of our culture. But for every one of those, there are countless others that flare with an almost impossible brightness, only to vanish from sight. They are the shooting stars, the comets that streak across the sky, leaving us breathless and wondering where they went. This is the story of one of the most brilliant and enigmatic of those shooting stars, a young man who exploded onto the screen in the early 1960s, with a talent so raw and a sensitivity so profound that he was immediately hailed as the heir apparent to James Dean. He earned a Golden Globe nomination for a role of astonishing depth, was profiled in national magazines as the next big thing, and possessed a multifaceted artistry that set him apart from his peers. And then, at the very peak of his ascent, he made a choice. He walked away from it all. This is the story of Lee Kinsolving, the golden boy who chose obscurity, and whose tragically short life remains one of Hollywood's most poignant and unanswered mysteries. To understand the flash of Lee Kinsolving's career, you have to understand the moment in which it ignited. The late 1950s and early 1960s were a period of profound transition in America. A quiet rebellion was simmering beneath the placid surface of post-war prosperity. For the first time, the teenager was being recognized as a powerful cultural and commercial force, with their own music, their own fashions, and their own unique set of anxieties. This cultural shift was mirrored in Hollywood. The old studio system, with its ironclad contracts and manufactured star personas, was beginning to crumble. In its place, a new type of actor was emerging, one who valued emotional truth over polished perfection. They were the disciples of the method, actors like Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, and the patron saint of teenage angst, James Dean. They mumbled, they slouched, they were unpredictable and electric. They weren't just playing characters, they seemed to be ripping open their own souls for the camera. They brought a raw, psychological realism to the screen that was thrilling and deeply resonant for a generation of young people who felt just as confused and misunderstood. It was into this changing landscape that Lee Kinsolving arrived. He possessed the classic handsome features of an old-school movie star, but his eyes held the brooding sensitivity of the new breed. He was the perfect bridge between the old Hollywood and the new, an actor capable of projecting both the clean-cut image the studios still desired and the deep, turbulent inner life that modern audiences were beginning to crave. He was the right talent at the exact right time. His full name was Arthur Lee Kinsolving Jr., born in Boston, Massachusetts, on August 30th, 1938. He was the product of a fascinating and seemingly contradictory lineage. His father, Arthur Lee Kinsolving Sr., was a career naval officer, a man of discipline, structure, and duty who would eventually rise to the rank of captain. His mother, Charlotte, however, had been an actress, a woman of the theater, a world of creativity, emotion, and public performance. This inheritance, this internal blend of military discipline and artistic sensibility would be a defining characteristic of Lee's entire life. He grew up in a world of privilege and expectation. He was afforded an elite education, attending the prestigious Choate School in Connecticut, a breeding ground for the nation's future leaders. He was intelligent, well-read, and possessed a quiet, thoughtful demeanor. But beneath the surface of the respectable naval officer's son, the artist's soul was stirring. He was not just drawn to one creative outlet. He was a natural polymath, a true Renaissance man in the making. In 1960, at the height of his burgeoning fame, Life magazine profiled him in a piece titled "A Talented Triple Threat." The article celebrated his prodigious and varied abilities. He was, of course, a gifted actor, but he was also a talented painter, his work showing a maturity and style that belied his youth. And he was a dedicated musician, rarely seen without his guitar, his music a private language for his deep-feeling, introspective nature. This wasn't a manufactured Hollywood image. It was the authentic truth of who he was. He wasn't just another handsome face hoping for a break. He was a deeply creative individual, a young man with a rich inner world who was exploring multiple avenues of artistic expression. This complexity is key to understanding his later choices. For Lee Kinsolving, acting was not the only thing. It was just one of the things, and perhaps ultimately not the most important one. He began his career, like many young actors of the time, in the burgeoning world of television. He became a familiar face in the living rooms of America, appearing in some of the most popular shows of the era. He guest starred in iconic westerns like The Rifleman and Have Gun, Will Travel, proving he could hold his own alongside seasoned veterans. Then, in 1960, he landed a role that would showcase his unique talents in a way that no Western could. He was cast in an episode of Rod Serling's groundbreaking series, The Twilight Zone. The episode was titled Black Leather Jackets, and in it, Kinsolving played Scott, a sensitive, thoughtful young man who is actually an alien scout, part of an advanced team for a hostile invasion. He falls in love with a human girl and is torn between his mission and his newfound conscience. Even in this fantastical context, Kinsolving brought a grounded, poignant humanity to the role. He perfectly captured the torment of a young man caught between two worlds, a theme that seemed to resonate deeply with his own persona. His performance was a standout, and it was clear to anyone watching that he was destined for something much bigger. That big break was just around the corner. In 1960, the acclaimed director Delbert Mann, who had won an Oscar for the film Marty, was adapting William Inge's Tony Award-winning play The Dark at the Top of the Stairs for the big screen. The story is a powerful, claustrophobic drama about the hidden secrets and quiet desperation of a seemingly perfect family in 1920s Oklahoma. It explores themes of infidelity, financial anxiety, and social prejudice. For a pivotal supporting role, that of Sammy Golden, Mann cast Lee Kinsolving. It would be the role that defined his career. Sammy Golden is a sensitive, lonely young Jewish man, a cadet at a military academy. He is the blind date for the family's painfully shy daughter, played by a young Shirley Knight. Sammy is an outsider, a figure of quiet tragedy who is subjected to the casual, cruel anti-Semitism of the community. His storyline culminates in a devastating act that exposes the dark underbelly of the seemingly idyllic town. The role was incredibly challenging. It required an actor who could convey a universe of pain, loneliness, and dignity with minimal dialogue. It needed an actor who could project a profound vulnerability that would break the audience's heart. Lee Kinsolving's performance was nothing short of a revelation. He didn't just play Sammy Golden, he inhabited him. He brought a quiet, heartbreaking grace to the part. In his scenes with Shirley Knight, the awkward, tender connection between two lonely souls is almost unbearably poignant. The critics were unanimous in their praise. They lauded his nuanced, deeply moving portrayal. Hollywood took notice in a big way. For his work in the film, Lee Kinsolving received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, consider who he was nominated alongside that year. Screen legends like Spencer Tracy and Trevor Howard, and the charismatic star Sal Mineo, who was nominated for his iconic role in Exodus. Lee Kinsolving, in his first major film role, was competing at the very highest level of his profession. He was now officially a star. The comparisons to James Dean, which had been whispered before, were now being shouted. He had the looks, the talent, the critical acclaim, and that same magnetic quality of a troubled, sensitive soul. The path was laid out before him, a string of leading roles, magazine covers, wealth, and a permanent place in the Hollywood firmament. All he had to do was walk it. But this is where Lee Kinsolving's story deviates from the standard Hollywood script. At the very moment when he should have been grasping for more, he began, quietly and deliberately, to pull away. The years 1960 and 1961 should have been a victory lap for Lee Kinsolving. He was in demand, a hot commodity. He continued to work, taking roles in films and television, but something had shifted. The roles he took were often in lighter fare, a series of troubled teen parts that, while paying the bills, lacked the depth and complexity of his work as Sammy Golden. It's possible he felt himself being typecast, pushed into the James Dean box that the industry had built for him. The relentless machinery of Hollywood stardom also seemed to be at odds with his deeply private and artistic nature. The interviews, the publicity tours, the pressure to maintain a certain public image, all of it may have been anathema to a young man who preferred the solitary pursuits of painting and playing his guitar. The very sensitivity that made him such a compelling actor also likely made him exquisitely vulnerable to the pressures and superficialities of the film business. We don't know if there was a single moment, a final straw that broke his faith in the industry. There are no dramatic stories of public breakdowns or on-set clashes. Instead, his departure was like his persona, quiet, gradual, and ultimately enigmatic. By the mid-1960s, his screen appearances became less and less frequent, and then they stopped altogether. Lee Kinsolving, the Golden Globe-nominated star, the brilliant triple threat, had simply vanished from Hollywood. This is the great unanswered question of his life. Why walk away? There are several plausible theories. Perhaps he grew disillusioned, realizing that the opportunity to do meaningful work like the dark at the top of the stairs would be rare, and that the industry was more interested in his image than his artistry. Perhaps he made a conscious choice to prioritize his other talents, to pursue a life as a painter or a musician, away from public scrutiny. Or perhaps in a move of profound self-preservation, he recognized that the world of fame was a dangerous place for a soul as sensitive as his, and he chose to save himself by escaping it. What followed was not a descent into destitution, but a deliberate pivot into a different kind of life. This is the untold story that gets lost in the tragedy of his early death. Lee Kinsolving did not just disappear, he reinvented himself. He moved across the country to Florida, leaving the Klieg lights of Hollywood for the sunshine of Palm Beach. He got involved in business, managing restaurants and other ventures. He traded film sets for the day-to-day reality of running a business. He chose a life of normalcy, of anonymity. He had been a movie star, and now he was simply a man living his life on his own terms. For nearly a decade, Lee Kinsolving lived this quiet, private life in Florida. He kept in touch with his family, but by most accounts, he lived a largely solitary existence. He never married and had no children. His life was his own, away from the prying eyes of the public and the demands of an industry he had left behind. But while he had escaped the pressures of fame, he could not escape the frailties of his own health. He developed a respiratory illness. The exact nature of the ailment is not widely publicized, a fact that is in keeping with the privacy he so clearly valued. We don't know if it was a sudden, acute condition or chronic illness that he battled for years. What we do know is that on December 4th, 1974, at his home in Palm Beach, Lee Kinsolving died from a sudden respiratory failure. He was just 36 years old. The news of his death was a small, quiet item in the papers, a shock to the few who remembered the brilliant young star from 15 years earlier. The golden boy who had once graced the pages of Life magazine had died alone, his immense promise seemingly unfulfilled. The central debate, or perhaps more accurately, the central tragedy of Lee Kinsolving's story revolves around his immense potential. The question of what if hangs over his memory like a shroud. What if he had stayed in Hollywood? With his talent for portraying complex, introspective characters, he would have been perfectly suited for the gritty, character-driven films of the new Hollywood era of the late 1960s and 1970s. One can easily imagine him in roles that went to actors like Dustin Hoffman, Al Pacino, or Jack Nicholson. He could have had a career as one of the defining actors of his generation. His story is also a profound commentary on the nature of fame and identity. The constant comparison to James Dean was both a blessing that opened doors and a curse that trapped him in a specific image. Was his entire Hollywood career an attempt to live up to, or perhaps escape from, that impossible shadow? Dean's death at 24 froze him in time as an eternal icon of rebellion. Kinsolving lived another 12 years, long enough to make a conscious choice to reject that icon status and seek a different identity for himself. His story is quieter, more ambiguous, and in many ways more tragic because it is a story of a potential that was not just extinguished by fate, but deliberately set aside. So what is the lasting significance of Lee Kinsolving? Why should we remember this shooting star who flashed so brightly and then disappeared into the darkness? His story serves as one of Hollywood's most powerful cautionary tales. It is a stark reminder that talent, critical acclaim, and public adoration do not automatically equate to happiness or fulfillment. For a sensitive, artistic soul, the machinery of stardom can be a destructive force, and the bravest choice might not be to persevere, but to escape. He remains a symbol of that great tantalizing what if. His performance in The Dark at the Top of the Stairs is a masterclass in screen acting, a timeless portrayal of vulnerability and pain. It is a work of such power that it makes his subsequent withdrawal from the industry all the more confounding and heartbreaking. It is a glimpse of a towering talent that the world was only beginning to know. But perhaps the most important way to view his story is to challenge our own definitions of success. Did Lee Kinsolving fail because he didn't die a famous, beloved movie star? Or did he succeed in a more profound, personal way? He succeeded in taking control of his own narrative. He refused to be a product, refused to play the game by Hollywood's rules. He chose a life of quiet dignity, pursuing his own interests on his own terms. While his life was tragically short, the last decade of it was one he designed for himself, away from the pressures that might have broken him. In a world that demands conformity, there is a quiet heroism in that choice. In the end, we are left with the ghost of a promise. We have the brilliant, heartbreaking performance of a young man who could convey a lifetime of sadness in a single glance. We have the mystery of a talent that burned too brightly and chose to extinguish itself from the public eye. Lee Kinsolving is remembered for the profound darkness he portrayed so beautifully at the Top of the Stairs, but his life's true. Enduring enigma is the quiet, solitary world he built for himself after he made the deliberate choice to walk down those stairs and away from the spotlight forever. His was a quiet life, but his silence speaks volumes, and that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.